Welcome back to the Renewables podcast. It is our third episode, and thank you to everyone who has got involved in the comments with the first two already. Today, as you will see, I'm joined by my co-host Sam and also our guest Dan. So first up, how are you doing, Sam?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. I'm still coming off the high of releasing the first two episodes. You never know how these things are going to land, and we covered quite an interesting topic with Pass, and then obviously the introduction on the first episode about ourselves. But I'm really excited to get into some meat, get into some proper guests, and have a chat to people like
Cue
Dan.
the meat.
Yeah, cue the meat. That's his nickname now for the rest of the show. But have a chat to people that have a different perspective to us, and really just to learn from other people and start that discussion with installers, really.
Yeah, totally. And Dan, how are you doing?
I'm the meat.
Meat in the sandwich.
In the sandwich of Mark and Sam. Yeah, we're doing all right. It's nice to be here, and I'm guessing I'm your first proper guest.
That's right, actually. Yeah. Does he get a medal or a T-shirt?
He's taken the cherry of the show, hasn't he? Really, as the guest. So.
Yeah. You be able to tell everybody about that now.
I'll put it in my bio on Instagram.
Good.
I appreciate you coming because it's a bit of a trek down to
you're very welcome.
Apprentice 1-to-1 where we are recording these. It's not the easiest place in the world to get to, so thanks for that. And we're going to have a little chat around battery storage now with spec systems, because I think there's a few interesting angles there. Sam's raised off camera about the MCS aspect as well, so we're going to include that. But I thought by starting off the conversation, if we just kind of gauge how we all approach it as installers. Obviously, I'm very new to this, so I'm picking it up and winging it as I go to a degree, but you two have been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, I think for me, an interesting topic that we wanted to raise was how do you actually size a solar and battery system, or a battery only or a solar only system, and what the considerations are, and if the way that we have been kind of forced to do it on the paperwork side through MCS, if that's a bit outdated now, like you just mentioned, because how people are using these solar and battery systems has changed so much since the feed-in tariff days when I first started. It's going to be quite interesting to discuss about that. But I'll kick things off with what we tend to look at, and see if you're the same, Dan and Mark, about that. I mean, for me, when we're looking at solar and battery systems, the solar side of it is what space have you got on your roof? Like, that has got to be what space have you got? Like, that has to be the first one. And there's a lot of people that have a lot of space but a small budget, or a very big budget but no space, and people in the middle. So I think space is a big one for on the roof as well as in people's properties. The budget comes in massively as well, which is one of them that I think is quite a big one to make sure that you have a firm view on what the customer's budget is. Because I don't know about you, Dan, but there's some people that have very big ideas on what they want,
Small
and then
pockets.
You send the quote, and actually we have to scale it down, which is fine, but it can be a little bit.
We do tend to ask people budgets. We try and manage a bit of expectation kind of in that first meeting that we have, and okay, we've got somewhere to go with this. We can go with what you want, or maybe we need to look at this in maybe over a year, or we can add to it in 12 months once we've got a load of extra data of what the system's producing, maybe.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really handy with that, with these systems now, you mentioned about being able to extend them in the future. And obviously a big part of the cost is, like, the battery side of it is the capacity. And beforehand, people kind of had to, domestically, either go all or nothing with the batteries because of the 0% VAT relief on the solar.
Exactly what I was about to say.
Yeah. So whereas beforehand they would get stung with 20% if they wanted to add to the system later on, whereas now it's 0%.
We'd quite often say, look, if you are thinking of having battery now and you think you maybe need 5 kilowatt hours, but in future you might want 10, try and stretch that budget now, and you are then going to save yourself that 20% up front, which obviously affects payback times as well.
Yeah, whereas obviously now you've got the we've got the VAT relief and everything else like that, but you do still save by having it installed all at once anyway, don't you?
While we're on site.
Yeah. Have you had many people, Mark, kind of saying, I'm going to just pull back on the battery capacity?
Yeah, it tends to be the way it goes when we've proposed systems. If they're trying to save a bit of money, it will be scaling back to a smaller size battery, because as you both just said, a lot of consumers come to you wanting the biggest, best system they can get until they see the numbers that relates to, and then it kind of rolls back. So we always try and gauge a customer's budget. Some of them don't want to give the game away. We've had that. We've said, what kind of budget you're in, and they really don't want to say because they think you're trying to needle into how much money they can ultimately spend.
Yeah.
But it's giving value, isn't it? I think consumers have to understand that the technologies are so different and the price points between brands are different as well, from the budget entry gear to some of what we might call premium products. But, you want to try and set that in the way that the consumer's going to get the best value from it. So it's a difficult one, but yeah, typically batteries kind of fade away as the budget shrinks.
Yeah, and it's an easy thing to add in the future. So for any customers watching this, Dan, what if they were to come to you and say, right, Dan, I'm looking at a system, I want to get a solar PV system, my bills are astronomical, what can you do? What is kind of the first things that you ask them, you look for at their property or within them, that customer themselves? What are the first things that you kind of look for?
As we've already said, it's always going to be roof space. So we'd always look to say, look, panels are now cheap, aren't they? Let's be brutally honest. For what they were even 12 months ago, panels have come down in cost. Always going to be roof space first, and then we try and get as much up there as we can. After that, it's probably going to be our biggest weapon in our arsenal for battery size. There's going to be meter readings and half-hour data from smart meters. People that didn't want smart meters, get PV and batteries, you'll soon change your tune. They are the biggest weapon that we've got in sizing batteries, managing your usage profiles, because you use most of your power at, say, 4 till 7 p.m. And trying to shift that outside of that to, I suppose Agile's a good one for trying to sort of explain that side of it. But yeah, smart metered readings, and after that we can kind of see how you use your power just off them readings.
So is that something what you're doing at this kind of proposal and survey stage, getting that data? And if they don't have a smart meter, there's the PEL option that I've seen you using, both of you actually, on your Instagram stories of late.
I mean, a lot of domestic properties do now thankfully have smart meter readings that do give us that half-hourly data where we can say, look, between 9 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. you used 2.5 kilowatt hours. Well, we didn't have that even 5 years ago, would you say, 6 years ago?
Yeah.
But then as we get onto bigger ones or three-phase installations where smart meter data is a bit patchy or vague, then the data logging stuff we do offer.
I think smart meters is a really, really good point, because people kind of have this instant kind of, I don't know, instant,
we're getting our
kind
tinfoil hats on now.
Yeah, they were really funny about smart meters, and actually I was a little bit, I was like, I don't really know if...
Yeah, we don't want to know what we're using. Well, that's the point of a meter, but as installers, it gives us a picture of half-hourly of exactly what you're using. So,
well, to any customers that are watching this, because we're kind of angling this podcast to kind of everybody, which makes it a bit harder to gauge the conversation, I suppose. But to come back to a customer, if you're looking for a solar PV and battery system, then I suppose the advice out of this little bit of the conversation is actually to get on and get a smart meter fitted, because you need it for your export payments anyway. So it's kind of get that smart meter fitted and give us some data, really.
So with your batteries, are you looking at like the peak of what someone's consumption would be and the overall kind of consumption over a night? Is that what you're trying to cover off when you're proposing your batteries?
You go first.
it's going to depend, isn't it? Are we looking at... It's going to depend. How is this going to depend? We kind of do this, can't we?
Well, yeah, I think it does depend, and you're right, because you've got effectively your storage capacity and the amount that you need to give to that property at once. So you're kind of looking at the spike in how much they use at one point, but how long does that go on for as well?
Yeah, it's even that, or like we've already spoke about again off camera, that we can look at overnight tariffs. Are we going to be buying more electricity on the night and then size down the solar system, or are we going to have a bigger solar system and then try and store a lot of excess and buy little? It comes down to customer preference really, and how next door isn't the same as my house, isn't the same as your guys' houses. No two are the same.
It's the arrangement you have with your energy provider as well, isn't it? If you've got a good export tariff, perhaps storing the energy from solar isn't as worth it. You can buy it cheap on the night. So.
Yeah.
And there has to be some realistic expectation of customers as well with those peaks. Obviously, if they've got a massive induction hob and range cooker and a heat pump and a swimming pool or whatever, sizing a system to meet that peak demand is perhaps beyond anything that you can do at a single-phase domestic level anyway.
Yeah, I think the good point with that, Mark, as well is again to customers, I'm trying to be the voice for the customer here as well to bring it back, is have a little think about how long you're going to be in that property for and what your future plans of that property are as well. So if you're thinking, right, I really want to go down the heat pump route, which you have, you kind of go, well, is it probably worth me looking at maybe slightly investing more on the solar side of it now, so I can generate,
I disagree with that,
and then get a bigger battery. But
as a heat pump user, I disagree with that.
Okay.
So you heat your hot water, which is off your heat pump, does early hours of the morning, sun's not up, and then your heating tends to be on in the evening or in the darker periods, winter. That's probably where your cheap tariffs and your batteries, for heat pump users at least, is more beneficial than your panels.
I think it'll probably I've not got the authority on that. I'm still on a dirty gas combi. Dirty gas combi. But I think no matter what way you think about that, it's, I think, forward planning so that you're investing maybe another couple of grand on either putting a bigger battery in, or putting more solar on, or even prepping some wiring, or thinking about where stuff's going to be sited. It's actually forward thinking, I think, is a really good thing. So you're not spending usually less than, certainly not less than 10 grand usually on a solar and battery system. Sometimes you can be up to like 30, 40 grand depending on the scale. And you don't want to find that later on down the road you've invested all that money and actually you need to pile more money into it to either move it a little bit to allow for something. I mean, you can't guard against everything, but actually going, well, I think there's probably going to be a doorway here at some point because we're thinking of extending there. That might be the easy place to put that solar and battery system at this point, but you kind of go, well, even though it's going to cost us more to put it at the other side of the house, should we look at doing that just in preparation for
a bit of forward planning?
I think that has to be, when you're spending this sort of money, you need to do that. So smart meter,
forward
planning. We're ticking them off. So that's good. So you mentioned about customer bills. What's the sort of average customer bill, like not the financial side, but would you say your kind of main customers are over 4,000 kilowatt hours per year or
per annum? I'd have said the average is probably, for us at least, is the 4,500 to 5,000. We do have the obviously odd spike, as everybody does, where you get the 10,000 kilowatt hours. I mean, we've got a customer that's using in the megawatts a month.
Wow.
And he's on an old classic spinning meter that spins backwards and doesn't have batteries.
That just needs a magnet on that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But no, so that is definitely, I think, is one that customers can look at even if they don't have a smart meter on. What about you, Matt? What do you tend to find with regards the kind of bills?
Same sort of level as Dan. I think our smallest consumption was around 3,000 units a year. Most tend to be between 4,000 and 5,000. Again, we've had a couple of bigger ones where that's been higher if they've got an electric vehicle, for example. So we do see that even as relative newbies to industry. So I think that's typically where most people are, isn't it? If they've not got a heat pump, they've not got an electric vehicle, it's just the natural consumption that people have.
When you are sizing batteries and PVs, are you taking into account EV usage in your battery sizing or not?
My thoughts on it is that it's such to answer it easily, no,
exactly.
Because the same as me. It's such a lump of power that effectively we're relying on the time of use tariffs on that.
Yes.
I mean, as someone with an electric van, I'm constantly fighting not to let the house battery discharge into it. That's the last thing I want to happen. Not so much for the cost side of things, but it's the usability of the system, I suppose, if you're constantly...
Which manufacturers are now moving on to.
Yeah.
But I mean, the analogy I always use to people, and I'm going to take it back to internal combustion engines, is you are essentially trying to fill an oil tanker with a jerry can, and we kind of disregard EVs.
Yeah. I think that's sensible, and one thing that kind of moves on to a little bit is the load shifting side of things. So for any customers, load shifting is effectively where you are still buying power, but you are buying it at a cheaper rate, and you are putting it into your battery, or even turning on appliances that can have delay timers and things like that to operate during that low tariff period. So Octopus have some great tariffs to
Octopus Cozy's one for heat pumps.
Oh yeah, the Cozy one for heat pumps, but there's Agile and there's is it Intelligent Go. And
they've all got them, haven't they? Ovo have got them, Eon have
Yeah.
got them. It's just it's a bit of a norm, but it comes back to that smart meter thing that they can do that and bill half-hour sections at different costs.
Yeah, and I think that brings us on to the next point is load shifting. I think has started, from my point of view, has started to make a massive mark in how these systems are sized and sold. Because if you had, before a lot of these tariffs were out there, if you had a small roof space, then you might want a battery to help with self-consuming that solar PV, but there's no point in you getting a really big battery because you can't do anything else other than store the solar power for it. But now more and more of these tariffs are coming out, I'm finding and thinking that these batteries are almost been fairly oversized because people are wanting to fill that big tank of energy with cheap power if they've got a high load or a high usage per year, because they might have a small enough sort of a small roof where they can't make as much impact on their bills through self-generation.
But does that not come back to, and this is a question to you, Sam, does that not then come back to time of year and sizing batteries? Because solar production changes from August and July to January, December. So do you size that battery for, and if you are going to use overnight tube tariffs, do you size that battery more towards the times of year where we have no PV? And even in my house, I've had days where we haven't produced a kilowatt hour of PV. We've been in the watt hours of PV. So do you size your battery towards them times of year and make the use of the tube tariffs, which is going to affect the topic of conversation we come on later on, but it's an interesting one.
For me, and you might have a similar position, Mark, or you might have a different one, but for me, I think with batteries, there has been a bit of a culture shift as to what they are used for.
Yes.
We've had a lot of customers that have got us to install a system for them with the intention of being more self-sufficient by using their solar power and then topping a bit of the battery up from the grid during a low tariff period, to actually having a system where they want the solar generation to go back to the grid because of high export payments.
Intelligent Go is a really good one for that because you can buy at 7.5 and sell at 12.
Yeah, that's it. So you're actually earning more by letting the power go back to the grid, and then effectively that battery just fills every single night from cheap power. So then, to go back to your question as to how do you size that, for me, and the conversation I'm now starting to have only since the last few installs that we've done to customers, is actually think a little bit differently about this install. Is actually you can earn money from letting your solar go back to the grid, but size your battery based on your average kind of daily usage. Your solar will feed into that a little bit, but if you can unlock that tariff, then if your battery is a bit bigger than maybe it needs to be for the solar, that's fine, because we can use the cheap tariff overnight to fill that up. So I think there's been a real shift from self-consumption. What do you do, Matt, on some of yours? Do you...
Yeah, there's an install we've shared on the YouTube channel, Matt Telford, he won't mind me saying, but he's kind of gone on that journey himself. We proposed and designed a system based on trying to cover off what we've spoken about, but in terms of the changes in tariffs in the year or so he's had it, he's shifted to filling his battery up overnight. He's exporting most of his solar and putting bits of that into his electric vehicles when it's generating beyond that, in preference to his house battery. So just kind of how they use these systems, I think, based on the tariffs they go on. And it is so fluid to a consumer's circumstances, isn't it? You might have people who work from home and they want to use what they generate as they generate it, and there's not really much need for a battery if they're out on an evening at working night shifts or whatever. And other people where it's totally the opposite and they're trying to collect up as much energy as they can and then utilise it on an evening. But yeah, definitely we've seen that. I do it myself. We've got Give Energy All-in-One at home, and we're always filling that up on a night to use through the day and then exporting our solar. Because that's the best way we've found to get payback from the system as a whole.
Yeah, no, I think it's on the. I feel like solar and battery are on the cusp of maybe
A big
changing.
change. Yeah.
Because
I think what batteries have done for solar is changed how we use it. Because like you say, it was all about your export payments.
Yeah.
Even 4 years ago, it was all about your export payment, really.
Yeah.
And I know it was a very small amount compared to what you can get now.
Thinking back to my days of doing it as feed-in tariff, people didn't care if they used it or not. They were just getting paid to generate.
Yeah.
So it's already had the big shift from just generate it, and if we use it, fantastic. If not, not too bothered because I'm getting paid 41 pence just to generate it. It's moved from that to, okay, I need a solar PV system to allow us to
Produce it,
actually
store it,
produce
use
it,
it.
and use it. And now with these tariffs coming out, it's kind of like, I'm going to generate it, let it go back to the grid, earn the income, and I'm just going to charge and discharge my battery every day to run my house and earn my income from the solar.
But there's another one to that as well, because you can then store it in a battery until a peak time where they pay even more to export it. And then you can start to discharge batteries in essentially energy trade.
Yeah, so for customers, again, watching this, what we're talking about here is playing a lot with, let's be honest, a lot of the octopus tariffs.
It becomes a full-time job, doesn't it, essentially?
Yeah, and we've got customers that do almost use that as a...
Retired customers.
I had one customer say that he brushes his teeth for a few minutes a day, so he can spend another 2 minutes a day or whatever actually just planning the next 24 hours on his battery, which I thought was quite interesting. But for customers watching, effectively, it's not necessarily all about the generation and what you can store from that generation now. It's effectively what can you make from exporting that generation,
It's become
on the
a game,
agile.
hasn't it?
Yeah,
It's become a game for a lot
It has
of
become a
people.
game. What can you earn from that through flexibly discharging that power back to the grid, even forcing your battery to discharge back to the grid?
Yeah.
And what can you self-consume from that solar, if anything, and actually charge that battery up from cheap power and let the solar just send that power back to the grid, and you reap the rewards of the differing price between import and export. So that is another good way to look at these battery systems.
Well,
Maybe the third stage of a solar and battery.
So there's another angle on all of this beyond just the client's usage and us proposing systems as installers. It's the way MCS tie in and around all of that, and the way we have to give estimated payback periods. So we're coming up with these best guesses of what consumers are going to do, and then making an educated guess on when they might get their money back. Do you think that that's still as relevant now as it was when it was first implemented?
I think it's still relevant, but I think the relevancy has changed. I think if we are going to, because MCS is all about the roof work and the PV panels more so than the battery storage side of it that we're talking about. But they used to be able to play with tariffs. It closes that gap on the return on investment that we have to give customers for the MCS stuff, because they are only interested on your panels produce 10,000 kilowatt hours a year and it will pay for itself in X number of years. But then when you are to start to energy trade or buy cheap, it doesn't take into account any of that. So I sit there with customers quite often and go, look, you've got a 10-year payback for a nice round number, but if you fully invest into the solar life, you can trim probably another 4-5 years off that just by using the system to its full potential. I think is probably the best way to describe them.
Yeah, I think the MCS payback calculation is massively outdated, because it is just like you were saying, Dan. It's just using really static figures to try and give the customer an open and transparent payback time, which is I'm all for. But I feel like nowadays, as there's so much flexibility in the tariff market, in the function of the batteries through load shifting or through backup, you might have a bigger system because you want a bigger backup system, a backup system for your house, so that if you lose the power in your property, it keeps your lights on or selected circuits.
But that adds costs and that adds return on investment. So
it adds years, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Adds years to the
massively
price.
so.
And so I think it's a difficult one, and actually means that customers start to possibly ignore the payback time that is given through the MCS route, because they're kind of like, why is it showing 35-year payback? And then you say, well, it's because we've put you a much bigger battery system in than the calculation really wants us to, because we're factoring in load shifting, or we're factoring in that extension that you're going to have that's going to have a load of electric underfloor heating, and we've also factored in all the electrics and the size of the battery for the backup side of the system to keep your lights on or whatever your selected circuits are. You factor all that in, and it's like we were saying, it's just ticking the years up and up and up, and it's
even
not worth
that comes even though from bird protection though.
Yeah,
And stuff like that. It's no two systems are ever the same.
I mean, data and its accuracy is where its value is, isn't it? If you think of, I don't know, your car temperature sensor or your clock in it, if that's presenting things that aren't accurate, its value isn't really there to you at that level. It's the same with the MCS payback periods. If it's not reliable and accurate, what's the point in delivering it? I think there does need to be some adjustment to that, but quite how you can make it work and be accurate because of all the fluid tariffs.
Yeah, I think the industry's moved quicker than the industry bodies behind it, and that's unfortunately the way it's going to play out.
With your heat pump, did you have to? I mean, you probably installed it yourself. Did you have to propose a payback period?
That was actually a Heat Geek assured install.
Did they have to give a payback period?
Yeah, I've got a return on investment on that.
Because I didn't think they had to do that from the heat pump side.
I believe it does.
Yeah.
We'll cover that off with a heat pump.
Yeah, well, that's a question for one of those, isn't it? I guess with that, the payback's going to be lots longer because it kind of costs what it costs, I suppose.
But no, because if we then couple the heat pump with overnight cheap electric, like Sam spoke about, all their calculations on payback, and I'm fairly sure they do give a payback, I'm 90% sure I've seen it, is based on standard rate of what the price cap currently is, where we are 3.5 COP, or 350% efficiency for people that don't really know heat pumps yet, which is these guys.
We're here to learn about them, definitely.
Yeah. For sure. I can talk to Sleep about heat pumps just the same as I can about PV. But then when we start to couple heat pumps with battery and PV, we can then start to run heat pumps at 7.5p cheap electric or from sun, or we can actually, on some heat pumps, and we can couple them to like MyG eddies and have the relay boards. If we're exporting 3 kilowatts through my PV, we can actually have the eddies turn the heat pumps on, but not variable like it would with an emergency heat element. We can have to say we're exporting 3 kilowatts.
Turn it on.
Turn the heat pump on, and we can start to soak up electricity, which is essentially free from the roof, into heat pumps. So I think what we're getting at, well, at least I'm getting at, is it becomes a really big, interesting pick, which is why I'm quite glad that I'm here, because it is the podcast that is going to try and cover all of renewables, as you've said. It does become a big picture of, well, that 10-year payback that we spoke about with just panels from the MCS, if I then couple that to my heat pump and my batteries and my EV and my hot water diverter, it all chips away at that return on investment. It's obviously an investment up front, but they all come together.
What do you think then, Mark, about if we did something radical? As I was talking as if I was MCS and said, sack off payback times for domestic properties, because the calculation has become too hard to calculate. It's like you mentioned with your sensors. We can't provide people with an adequate payback calculation. If you get 10 quotes or 5 quotes, each one of those payback calculations are going to be so wildly different, because some people have factored in backup, the cost for the electrics for the backup. Some people have factored in the fact that it's going to work with the heat pump. Others will just have not even factored in a battery. Do we just sack it off?
I don't think so. I think they maybe need to look at standard test conditions we apply to solar panels behind you. So maybe they pitch up with, this is the unit rate we're going to use in the MCS calculation, and this is how you can factor in your battery element due to that. And then the consumer can look at those figures and think, well, my tariff's different by 10% or 20% or whatever, and formulate a view based on that. Because what you'll find is one installer might approach it on the best case circumstances in energy figures, and another might be really conservative, and those payback periods could be a decade apart maybe. You don't know how much of an effect it could have, and the consumer might look at that and go with contractor A as opposed to B because they think they're getting the money back faster, when the reality is nothing's actually changed. It's just the way the numbers are shown on a piece of paper.
Changed even inflation rates on cost of energy and stuff like that. You can but shouldn't fudge them figures slightly.
Yeah, I think for me, I'd love just to sack off the payback. It's just more paperwork.
Is that what you're
I was trying to get you all to agree, but you're not going to agree, so let's move on.
We'll get rid of the audits as well.
I'll agree it's outdated.
Yeah, no, I think it's massively outdated, and it galls me every time we do a payback calculation. It comes out like 30 odd years. You say, yeah, but we're putting in this, and this that is not relevant to the payback of the system, and we start putting in that now, saying, look, please bear in mind, we are installing this, and this that isn't going to affect how quickly you pay back the system, but is going to affect the figures on this form, because we've included the cost within this calculation. Then you get into sticky water of, do you remove that cost out of it because it isn't part of the payback side of things? We've gone down the line of just include it so that we're covered, but do you start taking those bits out to say, well, that's kind of almost like a separate thing? But I quite like the standardised idea. That's not a bad one. Where you say, look, you have almost like these pigeonholes. You can either be, your battery can either help by this percentage, or this percentage to help your self-consumption. Choose one of the three and state which one you've chosen, so that it's either, people can see it. But yeah, I don't think there is an easy solution to it.
It's fair comparison, isn't it? I think that's the thing that you want to get from that, so they can see all the contractors are pitching at the same target, and when they make the decision, it might end up being that it's not accurate to their tariff, but in terms of overall cost on a proposed installation, you get that comparison, don't you? Which I think is kind of the intent of what they're trying to do, with some accountability for when they might get their money back down the road. Because as an installer, the thing that we're always worried about, or I am, is that if we've got this wrong and a consumer comes back to me in 5 years and says, well, we haven't had the return that you'd estimated, why? And if the generation is what it says it is, and it's all in the numbers of inflation and what the battery was doing, where do you stand in all that?
Yeah, I think I did hear something about they were trying to, one of these, these insurance companies that are trying to then look out for the next big
PPI.
payout. PPI, that's the word I was looking for. Looking for the next big payout, and mis-selling of solar was kind of on their radar, but I don't think they've quite worked out how they're going to try and do us yet. But it's scary, isn't it? All that sort of stuff, and we've just tried to go, this is honestly what we think it's going to be, but we can only be so accurate, and to be honest, we can't be that accurate because it's just so variable. And I don't think we can say much more than that on that. One thing I was going to just go back to was, obviously the last episode we did was on the pass side of things. For any pricing that you've started to do, or designing that you've started to do, Dan, have you kind of started to have to factor in, obviously not going for the easy option of it going right next to the main meter head or in main DB location,
which is nice because the one that I start on Monday is
but having to factor that in now to your designs because of the locations and fire alarms and stuff like that, because that's got to be a consideration now, isn't it?
I think as conscientious installers we're going to have to, but I think we can try and put some of that cost next, because it's going to add to the return investment thing that we keep coming back to. But I think if we can justify it to customers and say, look, we're doing it because it's what we're asked to do, but essentially you're footing the bill for it. It's not something I've come. We're still in the infancy of it, I think, is the thing. So we haven't. I don't. You might have come up against it, or Mark might have come up against it as of yet, but we haven't come up with a question where we've put a proposal in to say, look, we're going to have to fireboard this or change that door to a 30-minute fire door or fit fire detection, and then someone questioned it, well, why are you doing that? I haven't come across that yet to try and then have to justify them costs to someone, but I'm sure it will happen. And
have you faced any of that yet?
Not so much, because we were kind of excluding lofts already, but the indoor environments, for sure, we've got proposals that I can think of we've done which hasn't taken account for that, when we are going to need some fire detection. There's one we're going off to do in South Wales we were speaking about on Monday, and that's in an area where you might want to consider that. So yeah, it's one of those where it's going to be dealt with because it's stuff that's already been agreed. We can't kind of renegade on that, whatever documents come out subsequently. But yeah, going forward, it's going to add cost to projects, isn't it?
For that one that you're going to go do in South Wales, that where there might now be some variations to the work to bring it up to standard, are you going to give that customer a look? This is a document that's now come out. This is what it's going to cost to bring it up to that standard, be it add smoke detection, and see if they want to go and spend the extra on it or not?
We're just covering it as part of what we're doing. Yeah, there was enough budget in there for that not
You're
to
losing
be.
it in your costs.
Yeah, we've kind of covered it off in the costs.
He's an absolute diamond. I'd have build him. I'd
Well,
build him.
it's one of those where the conversation would need to be had if it was difficult. It's just a smoke detector that's going to have to go in the area of the battery. In the grand scheme of things, it's not that hard. But if it was the inclusion of a fire door, for example, where the costs are low and I'd need another trade to come in and do that, that's a conversation I think you would need to have with the client. Hopefully that's not going to occur, because we can propose stuff now and we're aware of it, so it's priced in at that stage. But as we said last week, with this kind of being sprung onto industry, it's a difficult hurdle to jump for some, I'm sure.
Yeah, it is. I know from my experience, I did a survey a couple of days after I think it was after we did this podcast, actually, so it was all very much in my mind. And it really did make me look at the full property. And actually, when I explained to the customer, because we will now be at the reprice stage, so we were adjusting the price after we've done the site survey, after doing a remote survey initially. And so I've actually just been up and honest, said, look, this document came out a few weeks ago. We are going to have to increase what we do here because you've got basically a battery smoke alarm that's not linked to anything up at the top of your stairs, and that's it. So we are going to actually have to look at putting you a proper LD2 grade 2 system in here, and as well as looking at changing this door to a fire door and put some additional fire protection in. They're like, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, I totally get it. And
I think that just comes back to being honest with customers, though, doesn't it? And
yeah, I think it does, and people can understand when you explain to them, look, this isn't because there's been loads of house fires because of solar or batteries. It's because actually they're trying to bring the standard up of properties and also preempt bad installs or stuff going wrong in the future. And might be nothing to do with your battery system or solar system. It might be you got a house fire that might then reach that system. And all I'm trying to do as an installer is install this kit properly and get you out of this building before any of that happens.
Yeah, and that's what I got across in another podcast, that it's not about stopping systems catching fire, because touch wood, they are kind of always going to potentially happen. It's about giving you we're going back to last week's podcast now, but it's about giving you and your family the chance to get out, or emergency services to get in to get you out, more than mitigating them catching fire, isn't it? But we've deviated off there.
With the coming back to the topic, with the kind of proposing these systems, there's two elements, isn't there? And they kind of overlap and interlink. One's the customer's requirements of what they actually, want when they're looking at it, and then one with the installer going to do the survey. So the customer kind of needs to understand what it is they need. If they want that big reserve of backup power, if there's a power cut, could be somebody who's trying to cover off those kind of things. If you think of a rural customer, for example, where that regularly happens, they might want to sit on 50% capacity. That's maybe not going to play a part day to day.
I was going to ask that question. If I was to come to you, Mark, and say my average usage is 9 kilowatt hours a day, what would you as an installer recommend as a battery size? Yeah. Are you going as close to that? It's a bit like electrician size and breakers, I suppose, isn't it? But are you going as close to that as you can? Or are you maybe applying 10, 20% to
it's why you kind of
average
to sit on that from the customer's side, isn't it? You could size under that and fill the gap with PV, but then as you've said, in winter, you're not going to get that. So you're always going to be sat underneath it, or you could try and kind of sit around that figure. So you're going to cover it off maybe 90% of the time, even relying on cheap overnight charging. But then they might want to go beyond that if they work from home, for example, and they're on Zoom calls and they want to ensure that they can do the day's work and not, potentially lose a day's salary because the power's gone off or whatever. So it does vary, doesn't it, customer to customer? There's no real set rule. This 9 kilowatt consumption, we're going to do this 10 kilowatt battery storage system. It doesn't work like that.
I think on that as well, it comes down to the size of the equipment that you can get. So if you have a customer, to take your point, Dan, if you said, look, I'm going to get you to 9 kilowatt hours, and you go, look, we can get you to 8, or we jump up to 16, kind of thing. Yeah. You kind of go, well, would you rather be slightly under it and supplement that with the solar, or do you want us to future-proof you a little bit more and add you an extra module on and take you to 16 kilowatt hours, which is obviously more than what you need right now, but you can have a backup potential there. And obviously, if they've mentioned about having an extension or doing this, doing that, they've got more.
When they're doing the Christmas dinner, and the ovens are on for 3 hours on Christmas Day.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got that bit of headroom in a battery to kind of.
Yeah, so I think the equipment does govern that as well, because it's not like we're bespoke making a battery to be the exact kilowatt hour that they need. So yeah, I think that definitely comes into it without a doubt.
But I suppose even on that, if a customer comes to you and go, well, look, I want to have a battery and I want a backup, so the all-in-one, or I know SolarEdge or Tesla do them as well, don't they? Then how are we oversizing that battery to kind of meet that demand? And for me as an installer, and I don't know about you, but I kind of leave that to a customer to say, look, how long do you want to try and run for? Do you want to sort of sit for an hour and you might need a kilowatt hour over it? Or do you want to try and sit for a full day and we'll put another 10 kilowatt, using my analogy, use another 10 kilowatt hour battery to essentially sit there for 364 days of the year. But the one day you need it, it's there.
Yeah, it's products that it's having that honest conversation with customers and saying, look, this is how much you want, this is how much it'll be for this size system. If you want to just take it up to the next level, this is how much it's going to be. Budget, for me, has been a massive one.
There's how much you'd like, there's how much you can afford,
Yeah.
and there's how much you can actually physically get.
Yeah, yeah.
The common theme running through this conversation is the importance of the proposal and survey, isn't it? That's the thing we're all referencing back to. It's taking that...
Or choice of installer.
Yeah, because there'll be some where they may do these remote surveys, or they may not even look at the consumption. They'll just see the roof space, size of system, and match a battery to it, and that's it packaged up. If you really want to get the best value for yourself, it's going through the effort to gather that data, isn't it, as a consumer and an installer?
Yeah, to take you back to the feed-in tariff days, again, when I was learning the craft. Oh, the good old days. Oh, the good old days. When I was learning how to do all solar and everything, it was 16 250 watt panels with a 3.68 kilowatt inverter. Bosh, there you go. That was it. That was almost like a lot of companies didn't deviate from that at all. It was 16 panels, so basically 4 kilowatts of solar PV on your roof with a 3.68 kilowatt inverter to drop into G98, and you were getting paid for a good chunk of power. Did deviate slightly from that, but that was the standard kit that everyone went out. And again, like we mentioned about solar going through like what I can sort of see now as 3 stages, when it transitioned from that money-making stage for customers, where they're getting like £1,200 a year just from the feed-in tariff, it going from that to self-consumption, that then becomes the sizing and the designing of these systems, the surveys of these systems, like you mentioned, really do matter, because that is then right. Well, now we're actually looking at what you're using. Beforehand, it didn't matter because you were earning income from it. Didn't matter if all of it went back to the grid, or if or if you used it all, you were earning income. Whereas now, and the stage beforehand, it's more about what you're able to use. And taking us on to the third stage, like I mentioned, where we're looking at almost using these batteries to run our house and letting the solar go back to the grid. Now it's like, well, do we look at putting more solar on to earn more income from the export? But how secure is that export? Could Octopus just turn around and go, you know what, it's actually 3p now, and you've invested all that money in that? So it's not guaranteed, not like the feed-in tariff was for 20 or 25 years, depending on when you jumped on it. So yeah, it all comes with a bit of a risk as to if you decide to go down the let's pump as much power back to the grid as possible. But I don't think the grid is moving away from a flexible grid.
No,
it's where everything's gone.
It can't. It'll get more flexible, if anything.
Yeah, with all the investment in wind turbines and grid level solar and all these renewable technologies, they tend to be fairly flexible in when and how much they generate. So for me, if you don't have a battery with your system, or even just a battery on its own, you're not allowing yourself to be part of this new tariff model, which is the flexible tariff model.
I mean, if you fast forward maybe 5 or 10 years' time, when more people have got solar down the same street and they're all sat there with batteries, your off-peak time might be different to mine. That might be the level that Octopus take it to. Let's say, Sam, your off-peak's 6 till 9 in the morning. Dan, you can have it at dinner. I'm overnight, and then you've all got your batteries, and you can kind of balance the grid out.
They're already doing that, aren't they, with EV charging?
Yeah.
With like the likes of Intelligent Go and taking over your EV charger, and I'm sat looking at a Zappy on the wall behind Mark. Or connecting directly to the cab, but they start to do that, and I think Give Energy are doing it, aren't they?
They
with
are.
Octopus, where they'll give you cheap times, or they'll even take from your battery to support the grid. So even that's already in its infancies.
Yeah, that's called Axel, I think, and we do that. So they'll give you a little slot.
Sound like
and
Octopus salesman here.
pay you about £2 a unit sometimes.
Really?
Yeah. So.
God, I think, wow, I'm going to need like a dictionary of all these different tariff names and terms and what have you.
Economy 6.
Yeah, economy 6, or economy 7, or economy 10. I think the last thing that I was going to mention about the past document was obviously the sizing of the systems as well. So obviously we've got 40 kilowatts internal and 80 kilowatts external, which are big systems.
It's big.
Yeah, is big systems. But for like a domestic one we're doing at the minute, that's 66 kilowatt hours, which is technically outside of PAS with the size of the property. But you mentioned in the episode about the past document, Matt, bigger properties might need bigger batteries to support their swimming pools and everything else that like this one's got.
Is that maybe where the past document's a bit blunt in its thing, whereas it maybe should say per square footage of house you can have 8 kilowatts.
Yeah, it's not a bad point. Yeah,
maybe that's how they'll go with it. 'Cause
Yeah.
they'll want to define these bigger properties at some
Seems to be
stage. won't they?
that 200 square meters, I think, is currently, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is a bit of a blunt cut off to no. That's what it subscribes to. Whereas maybe they should have, if you've got a kilowatt, not kilowatt, yeah, well, a couple of square meters extra, then
Yeah,
in theory you've got a bit more space to add a little bit more storage. It's maybe
that would make sense, wouldn't it?
yeah.
Yeah, I think it would, and like you mentioned on the podcast about that document, I think it'll develop massively. But to bring us back to kind of rounding things up a little bit on how we're sizing these systems, we found that actually we're looking at a lot of stuff here. I've been jotting some bits down here, and we're looking at things like roof space. We're going to be looking at locations for equipment because of the past document and just the bulky size of this sort of kit. We're looking at budget because people have a lot of big plans and then might need to do it in different phases.
Sound like my wife.
We're looking at the purpose of the battery and solar PV system. Are we looking for complete self-consumption, or are we looking for like a big load shifting element of that system? Are we looking to allow a lot of export because you're going fully into earning money from the export tariff and sort of hedging, sort of putting all your eggs in one basket with that. Future proofing of the property, looking at extensions, air source heat pumps, EVs, locate, and then that links into locations for future planning. What else have I got here? I think that's about it really. That's what I've got on this backup.
Backup's a big one. Backup is a big
If
one.
people want backup.
I mean, I think one of my most proudest jobs that we have is a full backup job on a doctor's surgery.
So I've seen your person on
Yeah,
that. The Zappies in the car park.
Yeah,
as well.
Zappy's in the car park. Nice big 10 kilowatt, 32 panel system, and it's got an all-in-one on it. But that building can sit there in a power cut and continue to supply service to the people that need it the most. And it is, when I look at it, it is probably one of my most proud of jobs that I've got is that doctor's surgery.
Oh, that's good. That sounds like a good one, that. So we maybe should have done this right at the start, but tell us a little bit about your background then. So did you come into solar
About
fairly...
4 years ago now,
4 years.
5 years ago now.
Okay.
So my background is I started as an electrician fucking 17 years ago now, back when I was 16, and worked in the new build sector, wiring houses for Persimmons, Wimpy's, Bellways, name a big builder. I've pretty much wired for them. Still do. We still price sites now, but I don't really talk about it very much. But kind of got really sicked off with it, and then not having a thank you at the end of it is what kind of tipped it over the scale for me. And then, funny enough, and you're not gonna like this, but I actually asked you for a quote for PV on my house.
You did, yeah.
Yeah,
that
I did.
That really put
Too
some money on
expensive.
that.
You did. basically, Mark, I'll tell you what happened. Is I got a quote off Sam, and I thought, how much?
Yeah.
I can do
Turn
that.
the
myself.
cameras off. Turn the cameras
Yeah,
off.
yeah. But I fell in love with it, like you. I fell in love with it, and one thing that I try and do with customers, it's going to come back to smart meters again, in the little in-home displays that they all have, is I try and get customers to stand next to that in-home display when I turn the system on for the first time and watch it go to £0, 0 pence, and everybody will pull the same face. It's that trying to not smile but smiling on the inside face. And that just gives me a real warm feeling that we've done something there for someone that has made a real difference to your wallet, but also to the environment at a greater level, I suppose. But it's one thing that does that little turn the system on and just go stand over by your smart meter display and watch it go to £0, 0 pence. And everybody, that's what gets me every time I
There's
turn
nothing
the system
better
on.
than that feeling. Turn the system on and seeing that customer's face when they go, but I've got the washing machine on. You're like, yeah, it's covering it.
Yeah. Put the kettle on.
Yeah. Let's try something higher load. Put
Yeah.
the kettle on.
I think that's a good way to close the chat up, unless either of you've got anything else to add to this podcast. But consumers, if you are watching this, is finding an installer who thinks like Dan and Sam do. They want you to be...
Or Mark.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
he
maybe
won't
to
big
a lesser
himself
scale.
up, I'm Mark.
I just rip you off. But it's one of those where you need to find that installer. They're the ones who look after you the best. They'll do the proposal in the right way, and they'll want you to have a system that you're proud of and serves you in the best way. So I can't emphasise that enough. Do your research, find a high-skilled, good installer. Anything you two would like to have on the end of that one?
What I was going to say was that you can see through this the length of this conversation where we've just been talking about sizing and design. That isn't including installing it and the time and kind of the intricacies of installing it. We're just looking at how do we look for the best size system for you.
How big a bucket do I need? Kind of.
We're looking at
analogy.
how do we find the right system for you, and there's so many different variables. And I think just getting a few quotes and then just picking one without having real good conversations with your installer.
Yeah, don't take that return on investment that we spoke about so much at face value.
Yeah, exactly. And having that really detailed conversation with an installer that you get the best feeling from, doing your research on them, and actually having the conversation about this sort of stuff with them is really important, because if anything, it gauges how much that installer understands about all these different areas. Like if you mention pass to an installer and they go, "What's pass?" you probably want to pass on them. There you go, there's a joke, clip that one up. And just have a good chat to them, and make sure you get a good feeling from them, and just put a little bit of thought into where this equipment's going to go and how it's going to work for you.
Awesome. On that note, thanks, Dan, for coming on to chat with us. Massively appreciate it.
You're both very welcome.
If you are listening to this, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Drop us a thumbs up or a thumbs down. If you're on audio, share your views out on social media. We love that. There's been lots of great engagement over the last week or so already, and that is what we're here for. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks very much.